Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I've got some exciting news. I have here the newly released Fuji X-T200. This is a final production model, not a pre-release or anything. So I got this camera, not for myself, I got it for Charlotte because she is a beginner photographer who has basically never owned a camera before. I think she owns a Fuji Instax camera, but that's like more or less a toy. So aside from that Instax camera, basically she basically associates photography uh, with cell phones. Basically, if she were to take a picture, she would be reaching for her cell phone. It doesn't really occur to her to reach for a camera. But that said, she has expressed interest in doing a bit more serious photography with dedicated cameras. Oftentimes when we go out, she will borrow my camera to take pictures, and so I figured that I'd help her out and introduce her to a mirrorless camera. Now, seeing as I have an Alpha 65 as well as an A6400, which is recording me right now, you'd think that I'd recommend a Sony camera. But actually, I don't think that Sony cameras are very user friendly. And I think that it can really put off beginners from photography. The menus are not very intuitive. And while Sony's are very capable in terms of autofocus and getting good pictures, I've not ever found that the experience was particularly enjoyable, even though I am a moderately serious photographer. So, I was very excited when I heard about this XT200 because when it was announced, it sounded like it was very much aimed at the beginner, and from all the previews that I've seen, the menu systems were designed so that people who are used to shooting with a smartphone should be able to get into it fairly easily. And so I thought that was a great introduction to sort of real camera photography for Charlotte. Now, I'm not going to go into details about how that worked out in this video. I think that I'll leave that for a separate video. But spoilers alert. I don't think that the Fuji X-T200 really quite achieve the sort of smartphone experience. I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's not quite there. The purpose of today's video will instead be to look at what happens when you hand this camera to a complete beginner, and let's just see what kind of pictures they're able to produce. I didn't tell her how to use the camera, uh, and so basically Charlotte just put this thing in program auto and just started shooting. I've also tried my best to take a few comparable pictures using my Sony A6400, and so we'll do some comparisons in this video. And then finally, one last thing that we'll do is we'll look at the video that was recorded using the X-T200, the A6400, as well as my iPhone XS. So I think the first thing I'll do is just show you some pictures that Charlotte shot with the X-T200. And one of the things you'll notice is that she really likes shooting in black and white. Yeah, so she's probably somebody who would love the Leica M10 monochrome. But I've done my best to include a few color pictures as well, because after all, Fuji is supposed to be known for their color science, and so I think it would be not so telling if we only showed black and white pictures. But these are some of the pictures that she was proud of, and so I've included them. All right, so the next thing I'd like to do is play through some of the pictures that she took with the X-T200 that I also matched with my Sony A6400. Obviously, they're not exact matches. I don't know what setting she used to shoot her pictures, so I just try my best to stand where she was standing and take a similar looking picture. In order to make things fair, she has the kit lens, the 15 to 45 f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens for the Fuji X-T200, and so I also use the kit lens for my A6400. It is not the pancake lens. I don't have that one. So the kit lens that I used was the 18 to 135 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6. So not quite the same, right? But I tried to match the focal length and the aperture. And I more or less also shot on program auto because I knew that Charlotte was probably leaving the camera on program auto as well. So let's take a look at some of these pictures. So the first picture that you'll see, and from here on out, I've left the Fuji pictures on the left and the Sony pictures on the right. So in this first picture, you'll see that the Fuji seems to white balance a little bit on the blue side, a little bit on the cooler side compared to the Sony. So for this next picture, again, you see that kind of trend with Fuji white balancing a little bit towards the cooler side. You'll notice that the roof of the building is a little bit more distinct from the walls, whereas on the Sony, which is on the right-hand side, the colors are a little bit closer and it's a little bit warmer. I also found that the Fuji underexposed a little bit. So for this next picture, this was shot indoors. The lighting conditions were obviously not exactly the same because we're sitting opposite each other at a table, and so I was backlit, so it's a little bit more of a challenging shooting condition for the Fuji in this case. But yeah, you can take a look at that picture for what it's worth. So this next picture I thought was a pretty nice comparison picture because we've got different colored candles indoors, so the same lighting condition. You can see that in terms of colors, I think both produces very reasonable colors. Sony has in the past gotten a lot of flack for its color science. I think that they more or less corrected that with their recent cameras. I don't have any issue with the color science. I mean, I think for video it's still not great. I find their S-Log very difficult to color grade, but I'm also not the most experienced color grader. But you can tell with these pictures straight out of camera, the colors are fairly comparable. I actually find that the Fuji, which is on the left, is a little bit overexposed. You can see a little bit of blown out highlights, in my opinion. In this next picture, again, we were indoors sitting opposite each other, so the lighting conditions weren't exactly the same. But as you can see, I'm not quite as backlit as I was in that previous picture, so it's a little bit better matched. You'll notice that again, I find the Fuji is a little bit overexposed in this particular shot, and it's white balancing a little bit on the warm side. So you'll notice that this is opposite compared to earlier, where I felt that the Fuji was a little bit underexposed and a little bit cooler. So clearly it's not a consistent problem. So this is a shot of our appetizer from that meal. Again, Fuji's on the left, Sony's on the right. Here in this case, you can see that the Sony is a little bit underexposed from the Fuji. I find though that the color on the Fuji is seems a little bit off. Seems like you have you have warm and cool lighting fighting each other, and it's just very starkly juxtaposed. Um, Whereas in the Sony picture, it feels more blended. The lighting feels a little bit more blended and a little bit more pleasing to the eye, even though it is a little bit underexposed. And this is our final comparison picture here. So this is an outdoor shot. I don't know why, but I think my Sony might have been set incorrectly. So the picture on the right is a little bit underexposed, whereas the picture on the left is from Fuji. It's properly exposed and looks pretty good. So that's all I have for comparison photos. I'm going to now show you some video that I shot with the Fuji X-T200, Sony a6400, as well as my iPhone XS. So here it is. The first video clip is from the Fuji X-T200, and as you can see, it looks okay. This is straight out of camera using the standard profile. I don't think I set any specific film simulation, so this would probably be the Provia standard. And I think it looks pretty good. It's a little bit contrasty, but that's fine. I don't think that it's especially crunchy. If I did get something a little bit flatter and I were to color grade it, this is probably what I would be aiming towards anyway. And so I don't mind that this is the look coming straight out of camera. One of the things you'll notice, however, is that the eye detection autofocus is not great for the Fuji. When Charlotte's got her mug in front of her face, it does not recognize the face, and so it does not focus on that. Instead, it's focusing on the background there. Eventually, it does recognize the face and latch focus on the eyes, so that's okay. But then you'll see, just a second later, it loses it again. So face detection autofocus for Fuji is not great. It can recognize faces and can recognize eyes and can latch focus pretty well. But something as simple as just covering part of the face, will completely fool it. By comparison, the Sony face detection autofocus is stellar. It's the best in the business, and it relies not just on simply seeing the shape of the face and the shape of the eyes. There's some, I think, artificial intelligence behind it, so that even when parts of it are covered, it still knows that the face is there. So if you look at this clip, it basically never loses focus on the face and the eyes. I find though that it's a little bit underexposed, but I believe I was shooting using picture profile 3, which is what I'm shooting on right now. And I find that picture profile 3, I like it for color reproduction, but it tends to underexpose. And so if you are ever interested in shooting picture profile 3, I'd probably notch that exposure compensation up to about a 0.3 or a 0.7. So finally, the last clip here was shot on the iPhone XS. And I think you will immediately see that it is the best looking out of all three. And the reason for this isn't because isn't because that the iPhone has better optics. No, it's because Sony does smart HDR very well. And so it looks great because the foreground is properly exposed, but the background is also properly exposed without being blown out. By comparison, if you look at the other video clips, for example, the Fuji, The foreground is probably exposed, but the background is way overexposed. On the Sony, it looks like the background is okay exposed, and the foreground is underexposed. And it's because both these conventional cameras don't do HDR. They're pretty stupid cameras, so they just do exposures as you set it, whereas the iPhone smartly will do different exposures and then blend them together intelligently. So yeah, the iPhone has the best looking video. So finally, I'm going to put all three clips next to each other and play them all side by side so you can take a look. Fuji's on the left, Sony's in the middle, and my iPhone is on the right. And I think you will see that the iPhone easily looks the best. Alright, so that does it for this video. This is not an extensive review of the Fuji X-T200, but I did want to put out a video as soon as possible. It's interesting, there was quite a bit of buzz when this was announced, but now that it's been released, the reviews are fairly slow coming for this camera. I think people are much more excited about the X105 and the X-T4. Of course, everybody's also very interested in the Canon EOS R5, so on and so forth. So this has kind of been forgotten, but I think this is easily one of the most interesting cameras that's been announced and released, because I think it's a step in the right direction. Really trying to make photography easy for beginners, making it fun, and all about getting good pictures without having to sort through the weeds in terms of settings. And I think it's a step in the right direction, but there are many annoyances associated with this camera that I think hold it back. But yeah, we'll have to talk about that in a little bit more detail in the future. Just a couple more words. I will say that it's interesting that despite the color science that Fuji is known for, and despite the different film simulations that are available, when I hand this to Charlotte, who's a beginner photographer, she still gravitates towards black and white. So that almost negates the advantage of the Fuji color science. The other thing is the X-T200 has an excellent flip screen. Has very good resolution, very good brightness, and it has a very responsive and well implemented touch menu system. I don't think it's quite on the level of an iPhone, but it's, I would say, probably the best that I've seen on a traditional camera. But again, when I hand this camera over to Charlotte, she immediately puts this up to her eye. Again, negating the advantage of this wonderful touch screen. So anyway, those are some interesting observations, and I think that'll do it for us today. Again, for those who are interested, I am shooting this video using Picture Profile 3. I did not use any exposure compensation. I am using external audio recorded using the Zoom H1N. In terms of lighting, all I have is this LED light set at 3200 kelvins at 40% power, and I have a little blue LED light over here. All right, so that does it. I'll see you in the next one.